tonight's meeting to order. Rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sue, roll call, please.
Councilmember Canfield?
Here.
Councilmember Chambers?
Here.
Councilmember Salzweedl?
Here.
Councilmember Yankovic?
Here.
And Mayor DeVore.
I am here. Motion to approve tonight's consent agenda has the committee of the whole minutes as well for approval.
I'll make that motion.
I'll support. Any changes, questions? Sue?
Councilmember Canfield?
Yes.
Mayor DeVore?
Yes.
Councilmember Salzweedl?
Yes.
Councilmember Yankovic?
Yes.
And Councilmember Chambers?
Yes.
All right, citizen discussion for items not on the agenda. No. Okay, old business, number 4, item A, marijuana ordinance, Mike? Yes.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. In your packet is a modified, this ordinance that we modified since our August 19th Committee of the Whole discussion. The ordinance in question has been pared down from 32 to 25 pages, and as discussed at our last meeting, the zoning ordinance requirements remain the same as they were in the previous ordinance. At this time, we have not added any provisions limiting the number of facilities, number of each type of facility. I'm still concerned with the possibility of restricting the number of facilities and propensity of opening ourselves up to being challenged legally with any of those requirements. However, the council is able to modify that portion of the ordinance if they so choose. We've given you a couple of different application processes from the city of Battle Creek and the city of Grand Rapids and how they are selecting their applicants for this is on the recreational end, but the process is no different between recreational and the medical. And we can discuss those as well. But Jessica's here tonight to kind of update you with the modifications she has made.
Good evening. As Mike explained, we did shorten up the ordinance. It's not quite as short as we'd like, but it's getting there. Specifically, I removed the repetitive criteria for each of the different license types that were already stated in the state law, and also removed some of the more onerous requirements for the applicants, including supplying the city with financial records and some other things that you felt was just a little bit too onerous. So removed those. And what I've provided you with, just as an example, as Mike indicated, are 2 different city examples, one from the city of Grand Rapids, one from city of Battle Creek. Again, this is in the medical marijuana context because nobody out there has recreational examples yet. So you guys are kind of on the cutting edge of this. But these are just examples of sort of how complicated you could make the process if you wanted to. So specifically, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at these, but the city of Battle Creek put together a provisioning center pick list. And I don't know if you got a chance to read that, but once an applicant selects things on their pick list, it's voluntary, but once the applicant does that, then all of the elements selected on the pick list become requirements for that applicant. And what it does is it moves them ahead in terms of the order in which they'll be processed and considered. Now bear in mind, you really only have to come up with criteria like this to choose between competing applicants if you decide to limit the number of establishments. If you don't, then you don't need to. You can just have straightforward requirements like you see now in the ordinance. But if you decide to limit the number, you're going to have a tiebreaker, and that's what these communities have done. So, so the city of Battle Creek, as you can see, you get points if the applicant is willing to provide improved aesthetics, increased energy efficiency design and operations, to minimize the impacts to city services, demonstrate increased efficiency of the property, and demonstrate low impact to adjacent property values and those types of things. So it gets pretty subjective, as you might imagine. The city of Grand Rapids does something similar. Again, you get points for the number of things that you're willing to voluntarily agree to. And you're required to submit what's called a good neighbor plan. And if you looked at this, you can see that it requires the applicant to undertake quite a bit of outreach to the neighborhoods and certify that they've done so. So these are two different ways for the communities to be able to sort of add up the points and then decide the order in which these get processed. Because as you might imagine, the order in which these are processed becomes very important if you're limiting the number. So, because if you approve one, or if you add buffers between similar establishments, that might knock the other one out of contention. And therefore, it's of utmost importance to be able to prioritize. So that's what these communities have done. Now, I think it's important to add that they've been challenged, and there's litigation pending. So it's not clear yet how that's going to, what the outcome of that's going to be, but I know it has not been dismissed. I know in Grand Rapids in particular, there's pending litigation as a result of this procedure. Nonetheless, I wanted you to see what's out there and start to think about how different communities are doing it. As Mike indicated, currently, your ordinance does not limit the number of establishments and does not provide buffers aside from the 1,000-foot buffer from the schools and daycare.
Jessica, I have a question for you.
Yes.
The Battle Creek one says submit for locations within 1,000 foot of each other, where I noticed Grand Rapids didn't have that. Is that the buffering that you're talking about?
Right, so in this, Battle Creek had 1,000 feet of each other. That's the buffering that they created for themselves. You could do that as well. Grand Rapids actually, I think, has a 2,000-foot buffer, so it depends on the type of establishment that you're trying to apply for, but Grand Rapids also has a buffer.
Yeah, because I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's not in those materials, but you would have you would find that out soon enough if you were going down that procedural path.
Is the buffer being challenged anywhere as being too restrictive?
I don't think the buffer per se is being challenged. I think things like local preference, I know specifically local preference being given is the subject of one lawsuit as being unconstitutional.
But they're all behind places that have limited the number, right?
That's correct, and that's the only reason you would have to come up with these tiebreakers, if you will.
I think the amount of available real estate will limit the number on its own. It would be hard to decide which ones, how many of which one you want. Because you have to have one of each no matter what, right?
Actually, there's a difference of opinion out there in the legal community about that, but I don't think you do. I don't think you do. I think you can decide which types of establishments you want to allow and which ones you want to prohibit.
Any other questions for Jessica on the ordinance? Next step then would be a public hearing.
Yes, if you're satisfied with the, to this point, the way the ordinance is written now, we can set a public hearing. We can set it for the next council meeting if you'd like. We can put the the revised ordinance on the website, show people what we're looking to do, and I can put the map up with the buffers and all that, and then you can have your public hearing if you so choose, and then at some point after that, you can implement.
This knocks out most of the stuff that we asked for at the last committee
Yes.
of the whole. So this is the ordinance as we would like it, so I think getting some public input couldn't hurt before we
Right. I would
think that our opinions are more important.
Right, I would agree.
So, all right, motion then to add a public hearing to the next agenda?
So moved. Or?
One of you can have it, Sue.
Mayor DeVore,
Yes.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Yes.
Councilmember Yankovic.
Yes.
Councilmember Chambers.
Yes.
Councilmember Canfield.
Yes.
And Jessica, you can be available for that as well.
Certainly, yep. And one last reminder, I want to remind you that this regulatory ordinance goes in conjunction with Andy's ordinance, the zoning ordinance, and that applicants still have to go through your special land use process, so.
And the state.
Don't forget that part. And the state, that's
a
right.
whole other thing.
Yep, exactly.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thank you. Item B, Michael, Lowell Township Water and Sewer Agreement.
Yep. We're still continuing our conversations with the township about the future use, the future water and sewer planning and possible agreements. So we met on August 20th with, it was myself, the mayor, Dan, Ralph Brecken, and from the township we had Jeff Sluggett, Bill Thompson, and Jerry Hale. So in that meeting we kind of just reiterated the current relationship of those agreements, and just to kind of reiterate to you some of the things about those is that the sewer agreement, which, if you don't recall, was established in 1987. The water agreement was established in 1992, and both are for 4 years. The sewer agreement consists of the service area north of the Grand River, and with the sewer agreement, the township currently has 18% sewer capacity, or 252,000 gallons per day. The township has no wastewater capacity limitation, but has a defined service area, and if there's sewer available in that area, they must connect. The city initially was to repair and maintain the water system for the township, but that's changed. The township handles their system as themselves, and the township is a wholesale customer. And something to remember, the sewer rates are to reflect a share of the township's portion of capital costs, and that agreement expires in 2027. And the city agrees in advance to share with the township capital improvements. Until recently, that hasn't been done. Part of our agreements were supposed to meet once a year. I would say until probably last year, that to my understanding, that never really occurred. Both agreements have had multiple amendments made to them, and both agreements also define the exclusive and non-exclusive sewer service areas. Just to recall, with water, there isn't a capacity on that for the township. But one of the things the agreement did spell out is the Water Advisory Board is supposed to be created. It never was, as to what you were supposed to do when you reach 80% capacity. And the water maintenance, as we've discussed, is responsibility of each jurisdiction. During our discussion, we did talk about Virginia's Township role in this. We did reach out to them to see if there was interest. The township just informed us they're not interested at this time. However, they did say that if someone was interested in connecting, they would consider a 425 agreement. We also then began discussion on the consideration of the authority. And one of the big concerns that we had in the discussion was debt obligations. They need to be evaluated as we move forward. We still have some outstanding debt on both the water and sewer system, mainly the last projects that we just did for Broadway. About 52% of that, I believe it was a $1.6 million project. I believe 52% of that is covered from the water fund, and I believe 48% is from the sewer fund. But when we meet again, we're going to share what all the outstanding debt obligations are for the system. We did have continuous discussion about the consideration of the authority, and we did discuss the pros and cons. Some of the pros are that it does improve the communication with the city and the township. It also may look better, possibly for future bonding, future grants, and also for shifts and balance to the system. We know that going forward, the most of the growth is going to be outside the city limits. So trying to find a way to shift the future investment costs in a way that is going to affect the people that are most impacted by those changes, rather than the people who it's not necessarily an issue for. That's a challenge that we're going to have to figure out if we move forward. Some of the cons that we discussed is one of the advantages you have right now is if somebody outside that service agreement, they want to connect, you have the right to request a 425 agreement, which basically is a 50 to 100 year agreement. It can be done a number of ways where they would be paying the city's millage. They would be receiving city services as negotiated, and also as a part of that, some of the revenue that comes in off the city millage rate, usually the new investment amount for the that would be the millage rate amount for the township would go back to the township. So those issues, a lot of communities statewide do this, and it works very well. So that is something that if you do form an authority, you lose that opportunity if you so choose. Also, one of the other concerns is protecting city workers. We have a number of city workers who work in the water and sewer systems, and it was agreed in our discussion that if an authority were to be formed, we would not wrong the city employee. We want to make sure that there's not, they're not being wronged as a result of this. Also, the other concern that was brought up was the loss of possible feel of ownership for the city. The city has invested in the system and has had full authority of it. Under an authority, that relationship might change a little bit. Those were some of the things that we talked about. So our discussion continued. We have about, Dick, 14 different action items we were walking through. These were just the first two that we discussed. And we're also going to be meeting again next week. And topics of that discussion are going to be continuing this discussion going forward, looking at the debt obligation, but we're also going to start looking at a timetable to see if we want to continue to develop this, keep moving this forward. Dick, what am I missing?
I think you've got everything.
Am I missing anything?
No. I have to say though, for the city employee point, having Ralph, that guy, they were throwing questions at him that I would have never ever thought of in 100 years, and he had every single answer on point. Gallons per minute, questions, how much, how long, how far, what can we do, what can we not do? That is there's a lot of talent and a lot of knowledge in that guy's head, and it was a huge asset to have him in that meeting, because we would have went back to Dan or Ralph or whoever with just a laundry list of things. But we need all these answers before we can make any progress. Now we don't have to, because Ralph had every single answer. I was blown away by how much knowledge is in his head.
But all in all, very positive meeting. I think there's a very good working relationship with the group. There's a lot of items that we still got to hammer out and try and figure out, but it's the future of the system. I think everyone's on board that we all want the same thing. We all want it to benefit everyone who's participating. So we'll be meeting next Tuesday at the township for our next meeting.
About a year or so ago, NWorks approached us about city water, and it's holding up development that they want to proceed with. They're incredibly successful out there. Without city water, they can't expand for the fire protection without horrendous costs. What can we do to expedite this to at least serve their needs and not hold them back?
Jerry was having that meeting, wasn't he, in between our two meetings?
Yeah, I don't know if he was. I reached out to David. Obviously, with the holiday, he hasn't returned my call, but we need to find out where they're at with it, if they still want to do it.
Isn't that Virginia's township there?
Yes.
That came up, though,
Yeah.
as a point.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
We presented them with a lot of information probably about 6 months ago, but don't know where they're at with it.
Great, thank you.
Anything else for Mike or Dick? All right. We put that back in old business for the next meeting too, because we'll have an update on Tuesday's meeting.
Sounds good.
Good?
Yep.
All right. Item C, city income tax.
Yes, just to update the council as to what we've done since the last meeting. We've set informational meeting dates. We're going to have public informational meetings September 16th at 6 p.m. up here. We're going to have one on Tuesday, October 1st, I believe at 11 o'clock. And then on October 16th that Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we'll have another informational meeting. Dan and I are preparing the information for that. Also, we did send out informationals, mailers over the weekend. Should have came with your water bill and your newsletter. And we're getting that information out now that we're really in the 60-day window now that we're getting close to the election. So that's where we're at.
Good. Public comment?
Yes.
On the income tax?
Yes. My name is Kathy Ormiston. I'm a resident in the city of Lowell, and I did receive the outline of the
Sorry, can I have your address, Kathy?
590 Shepherd Drive. Was I supposed to sign in?
No,
Okay.
after this, no.
We're just checking to make sure you really are.
Okay. And I did receive the outline as far as the income tax proposal in my water bill this month. And I 100% agree with the comment that was in there from Mike Burns, that the street conditions in the city of Lowell are at an all-time low. I don't think that there's anybody in here who can disagree with that. We all have heard on several occasions that there is no money to pay for street repair, and that the current revenue does not support the ability to improve them. The letter included the details surrounding the 1% and 0.5% for 15 years. It also stated that the $1.2 million raised in the first year could be used towards the road repair. The letter stated that $770,000 would go exactly towards the road repair, and that would cover a 7-block street. And it used the word reconstruct. So reconstruct a 7-block street. So based on this information, at a minimum, if the proposal were passed, Lowell would reconstruct one 7-block street every year for the next 15 years, literally reconstructing 7 blocks, a 7-block section every year. That's how I interpreted the letter. That's 15 7-block sections in 15 years. So that's 7 blocks of North Jackson, 7 blocks of Amity, 7 blocks of Riverside, which are 3 horrible roads that I travel every day. I assume you're proposing an income tax because you truly believe that and you've done your due diligence, that this is the only way to get the roads fixed. If you want to pass this proposal, here's what I recommend. First of all, define reconstruct. If that means filling potholes, it's never going to get passed. If it means total reconstruction like Jefferson and over by the post office, then I think it'll get passed. But it needs to be defined in the proposal. Second, in the proposal, I would list the 7-block sections that will be reconstructed every single year for 15 years. If they aren't the worst roads, it's not going to pass. And third, you know how much income will be generated with the tax. Actually, you have allotted over $250,000 for the administrative handling of this tax. So I recommend that if the income tax is collected and the streets are not fixed, those people that contributed get a refund. You are businessmen in Lowell. Many of you have businesses here. If you promise a service and you don't deliver on the service, you give a refund. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on the income tax? All right, new business, item A is a public hearing on the Unity School development. We can start, if Todd and Jerry have anything? And Andy will go to you for your...
Yeah.
You gotta walk all the way out.
All right, let me go all the way to the microphone. I think you all know me, but for the record, Todd Shaw, Unity School Investors, a resident here in Lowell. Andy's report is extremely thorough, so I'd be glad to answer any questions that the chair or the commissioners have from that. I really don't have anything to add to it, other than Jerry and I are excited to be taking that building, the 2 buildings that have been in disrepair for over 15 years, and doing something cool with them. A lot of landscaping, putting our best foot forwards there, and then to the tax base. That woman's comments were, I think, unusually timely for one of the positions that we like to take, is that will add us a significant amount of money to Lowell's coffers through that project. So that said, if anybody has any questions, Chair or the Commissioners, we'd be glad to answer them. We also have our contractor here, as well as our landscaper, Mark Anderson from Terra Verde.
Mr. Mayor, you need to ask his address or Kathy's going to sue us for discrimination.
216 West Main.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, Andy, your turn.
Mr. Mayor. I provided a written memorandum to the City Council on August 29. It's fairly lengthy. I apologize in advance. This will take a little while to go through. So what I will do here is whenever we have an application for a PUD, we went through the same exercise with the Planning Commission. We review all of the applicable standards in the zoning ordinance, have that discussion with you to determine whether or not we feel those standards are met, where there are any items of concern. And then from there, I will turn it back over to the council for further deliberation and comment. The proposed PUD is on about 2 acres located at 219 High Street. I think everybody here knows where that is. It's been talked about for quite some time. The Planning Commission had 2 meetings on it the last couple of months. Generally, the project will be known as Riverview Flats. It will be condominium units in several buildings. The project is broken up into 3 phases. The first phase would include most of the parking, the garage structures, and then in addition to and rehabilitation of the bus garage on that property. The second phase would be rehabilitation of the school. And the third phase would be the construction of 2 additional new buildings on the property. In total, the applicant is proposing approximately 44 units. Those would be spread out over 3 phases. So the first phase, I think, would have 16, and then the next 2 phases would each have about 14 residential units in each phase. The Planning Commission did review this at its July and August meeting. In August, the Planning Commission did adopt a resolution of recommended approval of the PUD to the City Council, subject to a list of conditions which should have been included or given to you this evening. And we can review those as well. If there are no questions at this point, Mr. Mayor, I will begin walking through each of the objectives and qualifying conditions of the PUD. I'm not going to read everything, but I will summarize each of them along with our thoughts. The first objective pertains to encouraging the provision of and protection of open spaces, cultural and historic resources, the development of recreational amenities, etc. I think that generally, we found that standard was satisfied. I think there's some cultural and historic value to that property, considering that we have the old school, the old bus garage. It's been here for a long time. And additionally, there is some open space on the plan, although admittedly not a lot. This isn't a project where we feel like the open space should be judged purely in terms of its quantity, because it's in a fairly urban setting. It's on a city block. So a typical open space development pattern doesn't really lend itself well to this property. We look at this as to how well it fits into the overall context of the city in this particular area, and there is some open space, some landscaping on the property that should be reviewed and considered by the City Council. The second standard is to encourage developers to use a more creative and imaginative approach to the development of the property. This is an interesting site, and it's an interesting underlying zoning district. It's in the mixed-use district, which was written probably about 5 years ago. The intent of that district is to encourage urban development, basically, so buildings built close to the street, minimal setbacks, lots of transparency on the ground floor, walkability, things of that nature. In this case, because we're talking about existing buildings on the property that don't strictly meet all of those standards, some flexibility probably makes sense here. And the ability to develop this site as proposed is limited in our view through the strict application of those district standards. Additionally, the property itself is on a corner lot and a through lot. Technically, there are 3 streets, High Street, King Street, and Meadow Street, so there are 3 front yards. And within the zoning ordinance, there are limitations to what you can do in the front yard on those sites. So we feel like there are some limitations there as well. Item 3 is to allow for market-driven redevelopment in places that are most conducive to accommodating such additional activity. And again, the site is downtown Lowell on the Platte River, adjacent to residential neighborhoods, near public facilities, so on and so forth. We feel the property is well positioned as an infill site where higher residential densities make sense. Typically, in urban setting near downtown, communities are looking for additional residents. When you're talking about downtown development, downtown economic development, wanting shops and restaurants and things like that in your downtown that need to be supported by people living in and near downtown. So we feel that this project satisfies that standard. The fourth standard is to facilitate economic development through the creation of a mix of uses and/or building types. There's not a mix of land uses on this property, as it is each within one land use type. They're all multifamily residential buildings. But units within the buildings and the buildings themselves will be varied. Some of them, obviously there's the bus garage and the school itself are older buildings. There are also 2 new buildings proposed on the property. They would particularly be near the corner of King and Monroe. And again, with 44 units blocked from downtown, there is some positive economic development activity that would likely coincide with that. How much we can't be sure. I don't expect a dramatic impact because 44 units in the grand scheme of things is not overwhelming. But we believe that if the project is successful, it would make a positive contribution to the overall economic development in the city of Lowell. Fifth standard is to create walkable developments with pedestrian-oriented buildings and open space that connect nearby destinations or neighborhoods. I think it clearly does satisfy that standard. It's located on the Riverwalk. It's already connected to sidewalk that exists presently. There are additional sidewalks proposed on the site that would connect to the Riverwalk within buildings and to the greater sidewalk network, allowing people to pretty easily walk around from the project to downtown, to City Hall, to the library, to parks, etc. Item 6 is to provide for the adaptive reuse of significant or historic buildings. Unity School Building, I think, does have some historic qualities to it. It's not officially designated as an historic building, but it's been here for a long time. Many people attended that school prior to its closure, so we think there are some historic qualities to it. Item 7 is to allow phased construction with the knowledge that subsequent phases will be approved as originally planned and approved by the city. This is a 3-phase project, which we don't have a lot of those here, and what we're looking for with phase project is to have each phase should be able to stand on its own for a fairly long period of time as an independent development, even if that's not the overall goal. Sometimes phase projects can take 5, 10, 15 years to reach that full build-out stage, so on the interim, when phase 1 is complete, phase 1 would need to be able to stand on its own as a functional project. If they move ahead with phase 2, then phases 1 and 2 together will need to be able to function together as a complete and functional and independent project. And then, of course, when the 3rd phase is added and the entire project comes to fruition, that entire 3-phase project will then obviously need to be able to function. So that's something that I think will be important for the council to look at as it reviews the project to make sure that each of those phases, knowing that if phase 2 and 3 don't happen for a long time, will phase 1 on its own be something that is beneficial to the city. Item 8 on my list here, I'm on page 5 of my report. To promote flexibility in design and to permit plan diversification in the location of structures. There is some flexibility in design granted here, which I touched on earlier. There are some requirements for parking, for setbacks, and there are some build-to-zone requirements in the mixed-use zoning district. And so the applicant is proposing to take advantage of some of the flexibility that the PUD process affords them, if approved, obviously. Item 9 is to promote the efficient use of land and to facilitate more economic arrangement of buildings, and et cetera. Again, because there are 2 buildings on the property, there is some efficiencies there. Further, because this is an infill project, there are already utilities accessible to the site. We don't have to extend utilities, and we're not talking about building new roads. We're not talking about an extensive additional sidewalk network that the city would need to maintain. So from a land use efficiency perspective, the project, in our view, likely satisfies that criteria. Item 10 is to minimize adverse traffic impact and to accommodate safe and efficient, pedestrian access and circulation. Obviously, the project will generate vehicles and traffic, and they all do. Multifamily projects generate less traffic overall typically than a single-family development. There 44 units when it's fully complete would be several hundred trips per day, obviously moving throughout the city to and from this location. The city council will decide if that's an acceptable, overall impact. Similarly, there is a existing sidewalk network there, and the applicant is proposed to make some connections to that. And again, between the Riverwalk and the existing sidewalk network on the adjacent blocks, the city will need to evaluate that to make that determination if you feel it is reasonably safe for pedestrians as well. Item 11 on the list here is to provide for redevelopment of sites or buildings that are underdeveloped or have fallen into disrepair. I feel like the school meets that criteria. It's been sitting there for a while. It's been vacant for a while. There's been some interest over the years from various folks who have looked at it. So I think there is some interest in the property. I think it's clear the site could use some redevelopment, and redevelopment on the property would be beneficial. Restoring the buildings and the property to a more productive and useful state for the city would be beneficial to the community. Item 12, to combine and coordinate architectural styles, building forms, and building relationships within the PUD. The exteriors of the buildings are fairly consistent with one another. In the project narrative, the applicant states that new materials will coordinate and complement architectural styles and building forms that exist. Don't know if you've checked out the project website. There's some renderings on there that illustrate what the project would look like. And again, that is something I think that is worth discussion for the city council, is if the proposed architectural styles, materials, and so forth are sufficiently consistent and compatible throughout the project. The 13th item on the list here, I'll take a break, is to ensure quality of construction with other developments within the city. The applicant states that the quality of construction will meet or exceed that of other buildings within the city. There's not a lot of substance behind that, so again, if that's something that is of interest and that is worth discussing for the council, then it's certainly within your right to ask for additional information as to how he intends for that to happen. I'm going to pause there because that's the end of the first list. There are more, so don't worry, I'll be here for a minute. Are there questions on those the first list of standards, which is the overall purpose and objectives for a PUD for a community?
I just had a question about item 7. It says to allow phase construction with the knowledge that subsequent phases will be approved as originally planned and approved by the city. But we aren't really seeing much for plans for the second and third phase at this point.
Well, you've seen plans as far as where the buildings are going to be, how the overall site plan will work, right? So how this typically works moving forward is that let's hypothetically say that phase 1 is approved, is constructed. When they come back for their phase 2 approval, they will come back to the planning commission, and then their phase 2 plan will need to substantially conform to what is shown on the plan for you today. So if they come back with phase 2 that looks totally different, that has a big expansion of the school building, or it's something noticeably different and substantially different from what's in front of you now, then this whole PUD process would start back over. So they would have to start over, reapply to the planning commission for the entire PUD, another public hearing like we're having today for the city council, and start all over again. So there is a process built into the ordinance for PUDs that allows for the city to ensure that phases 2 and 3 are going to conform with what's shown presently. Now, admittedly, yes, they rely on some details. That's very typical for PUDs because conditions can change. They're saying 14 units now based on market conditions in a couple of years. Maybe they'll be at 10, I don't know. Or maybe they'll have some other modification to the building proposed or something like that. So if that's the case, If it's a very minor thing, like, you know, they're losing a parking spot or adding a parking spot or something like that, it's probably not a big deal. But in the instance where there's a more significant change, then we would make sure that it goes through the proper review process to make sure that it's consistent with what you see here tonight.
Right, the third phase doesn't concern me as much as the second, because with High Street and our limited access to the boat launch, all we're really seeing is the footprint of the building now. We aren't
Right.
seeing much other than that.
Right. So, yeah, that's certainly, I mean, it's I think, worth asking tonight of the applicant if he can elaborate on those plans, if he knows what they are yet, and how some of those concerns are going to be addressed.
Thank you.
And I have one, if, for instance, phase one is passed, and I'm looking at phase two, because that building is just as blighted as anything else, is there some recommendations we can make that they maybe replace windows so it doesn't look as blighted? I mean, if I was buying a $200,000 condo, last thing I want to look at a building that's boarded up for the next 2 to 3 years in phase two, if that's how long it takes. So I don't know if there's something we could add to that to make it look more presentable to the overall area, or not at this point.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, typically, when the first phase is approved, you focus on the first phase, and then this phase two approvals come on later. Now, I think if it's possible, if there's a substantial interest, you know, if the city has a substantial interest in making some of those improvements to phase two earlier, or if there's some of that work they can do, but there's a risk involved there on behalf of the applicant too, right? Because if for some reason that second phase isn't approved, then that's a huge investment they made in a subsequent phase that ultimately doesn't get approved. So I guess that has to be
Well, I thought the whole thing was to beautify the area and get rid of the blight, and I honestly don't see that happening through, you know, maybe 5-10 years down the road. So that's my concern.
Understood, and this is not, you know, shouldn't be thought of as something that all three phases are not going to be done in a year.
Right.
This isn't going to be able to, so it's important to think of this as a long-term project. You know, phase two might not occur for several years. I mean, it totally depends on what the marketplace is. So we saw with a lot of our clients during the recession in 2008 that there were PUDs that phase one was done and phase two was not touched for, you know, 10 years. And that's possible because we don't know how things are going to go. So
I think though, they have an interest, they have, I've heard some deposits on buildings, they want it to look as good as it can. You know what, $100 worth of paint that's the same color as the building to kind of make it blend in is gonna be a huge improvement. I'm sure they do something like that too. They're not gonna leave OSB faded and blistered there for 5 years.
That'll be market driven too, right? The aesthetic, if that's, if people are facing the river, maybe it's worth living next to a plywood building for a couple of years. But if they're facing that side, but they're ultimately going to be responsible to sell them, right? Not us.
yeah, I mean, to the
They would
extent,
have to do what they think their customers need.
right, and to the extent that you can require them to do something like that to a subsequent phase, I guess I don't know the answer to that, so.
I have a question. So, couldn't the property maintenance code be used as a reason
Sure.
to, I mean,
If you have an
rather
adaptive property
than,
maintenance code, that would certainly
Right, okay.
control this and every other property in the city.
All right. Qualifying conditions, John?
Yep. So this is starting about 2/3 of the way down on page 6 of my report. So qualifying conditions means that in order to apply for a PUD, there are certain conditions that need to be met to even qualify to make that application. First condition is that the tract of land must be either in one ownership or with written approval for all owners of affected properties. As you know, there is a fairly small portion of this building that does extend out into the High Street right-of-way. They propose to remove that portion of the building as you have noted. So because of that, because they are showing taking that part of the building off, the entire project is now contained on that one parcel. So there is only one property involved, and they do in fact own it. The second condition
states that they need to fulfill at least one of the following 4 conditions. The first one would be that it contains 2 or more separate and distinct uses, 2 that it is at least 25% open space, or 25% preservation of significant natural features. C would be 60% open space preservation, and D would be that it constitutes a significant redevelopment of an underutilized or vacant property where conventional development may not be feasible. In our view, that this plan fulfills letter D, it does not fulfill letters A, B, or C. But I do believe that this is an underutilized property. I think you guys do too, and where a conventional development approach may not be feasible. Item 3 is that the applicant must demonstrate that it's consistent with the adopted master plan. The Lowell master plan, which was adopted, I believe, in 2007, shows this property within a mixed-use, future land use designation, which is intended to permit a mixture of residential, office, and commercial land uses. This category also may include redevelopment of existing areas or new construction, and should promote pedestrian accessibility. I think this checks most of those boxes, although it does not, I agree, permit or include any mixed use on this property, taken as a whole with the other properties in this area and its proximity to downtown. We feel like it is generally consistent with the city's master plan. So we'll get into more detail with that in just a minute. Other questions on those 3? If not, we will get into the standards for PUD rezoning. It's important to point out here, I guess, procedurally, that there are 2 ways that a PUD can be processed. Some communities do it via the special land use process, and other communities do it via a rezoning to a PUD district. Your ordinance contains provisions that would require a rezoning. So if this were ultimately approved, the property would be rezoned to PUD. There is another property in the city that is a PUD, the Highland Hill development, I believe, zoned PUD, and that shows that. With that, there are several standards that must be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council in considering rezoning a property to PUD. The first one is that it complies with the purpose and qualifying conditions of sections 15.1 and 15.02, which is what we just went over. So obviously, if you find that it does not meet either the qualifying conditions or the purpose of the PUD district, then it wouldn't meet this first standard either. Number 2 relates to the uses conducted on the PUD, its impact on the community, and whether or not it complies with and further implements the policies of the adopted master plan. So the master plan is your blueprint. It's your policy document that sets forth in fairly general terms how the city should develop over the long term being 20, 30, 40 years. There are a number of goal and objective statements within your master plan. We already talked a little bit about the future land use map that shows in a spatial sort of form how the community should develop and what land uses should go where. There are also goals and objectives for policies, and those are kind of lumped into several different themes or groups. There's a goal for community image that promotes Lowell's image as a historic community with natural resources such as the Flat River. Objectives including things like improving access and views of the Flat River and restoration of buildings. There's another community image goal that talks about restoration of buildings, retaining their style, things like that. There are a fair amount of changes to these buildings that would